Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. We're definitely slightly nervous to be going on first, and it's the first time we've done a double act as well. So, bear with us. Give us a big smile as well, because that always helps, doesn't it, when you're up here. So I'm Immy. I'm one of the co-founders of CIVIC SQUARE.
I'm Charlie. I'm one of the co-leads at CIVIC SQUARE.
And CIVIC SQUARE is an organisation based in Birmingham that was born out of a young people's movement back in 2010. Our work is focused really deeply on what it means to put people in their places at the forefront of tackling the large social, climate, social, ecological challenges they face, and creating the infrastructures, the skills, the resources, the tools to help communities in their neighbourhoods to be at the forefront of tackling those challenges. We don't have that much time today. I've got a timer and I've got people timing, and I'm like a Guardian long read, so this could be like all go very wrong. So there's lots of pictures. Immerse yourself in what our work feels like. Go on our Instagram. 90% of the time, our work feels like this. In the heart of our places, in the heart of our neighbourhood, with people, with communities, and particularly alongside communities that most people feel shouldn't be anywhere near the big challenges. You know, it's too complicated for them, and our work is really situated in that. So we're going to take you back to last year's keynote, Indy Johar, and pick up where he left off. We worked really closely with Dark Matter Labs. Earlier this year, we launched a piece of work with them called 3 Degree Neighbourhood, which looks at where we are. We won't have time to talk about the extensive work in that piece of research, so you can pick up a copy or you can see it online if you want to get into more detail. For us, working with people like Indy and Dark Matter Labs in our whole career has really helped us to go, okay, here's where we are, what the heck does that mean? And then particularly, what does that mean in our communities, in our places, in our everyday? Where's the next spot that we can start? So we're going to tell you a little bit about the 3 Degrees work and then tell you a bit more about CIVIC SQUARE.
Great, thanks, Immy. So we have sort of littered the front of the stage with many copies of the 3 Degrees publication. So if you do want a physical version, please feel free to come grab it at some point. If they do run out, it's also on Medium, and you can it's all open source, it's all available to download anytime, so don't worry too much if you don't grab one. So the 3 Degrees research that we did with Dark Matter Labs is really about trying to kind of set the scene for where we are both locally in our neighborhood, but also as a country and also as an entire planet when it comes to climate and ecology and the social consequences of these. So as I'm sure I don't need to explain to you guys, at the moment we are at 1.3 degrees of global average warming compared to pre-industrial levels. 1.5 degrees was the agreed threshold of the Paris Climate Accord. And what became very clear in compiling this research was that as it stands, we're more than likely to reach 3 degrees of warming within the next 100 years. And it's really important, I think, to say that this research and 3 Degree Neighbourhoods is not an endorsement of this future, but it's more conducted in the spirit of preparing for the worst and designing for the best. So we try to frame a lot of this research through that lens. So in terms of where we stand then, this is our sort of predicted trajectories according to current policies, current pledges, and existing standards of net zero. And you can see that even according to best case scenarios, we are looking at sort of exceeding ecological tipping points. This obviously is not as straightforward as things just getting warmer. We know that higher average temperatures mean more energy in our ecological systems, which means more precarious, extreme weather outcomes. We also know that these changes will be experienced differently at different scales. So 3 degrees of average warming means 5 degrees of warming on land, which can mean 8 degrees of warming in urban neighborhoods, inner city neighborhoods, like where we're based in Ladywood, and many, many other parts of the UK. So tangibly, what this means is that we are more than likely to need to factor in risks including heat, drought, food shortage, flooding, climate migration, and increased cost of living into any decisions we're making about the near future. And again, so what this means tangibly is that what we think of as normal and what we think of as what we are designing for through our work, both in the built environment and beyond, is that things will be fairly radically different. Just a couple of years ago in Birmingham, we had, and across most of the UK, we had our first 40-degree day. And I think it's important to kind of ground that in the fact that there were 6,000 excess deaths as a result of this one day of this sort of, right now, what is considered anomalous weather. But these anomalies are only going to become more common, more normal, and it's really crucial from our point of view that we start to take these into account when we're thinking about the kind of work we're doing. And
so, standing in Paisley, and we heard from a public health, one of the team who work in public health last night, it doesn't need me to say that we kind of know and have already are seeing and experiencing where the impacts of these risks are experienced more. Arguably, across the global south, we have known the poorest people and global majority of people have been facing the impacts of the overconsumption and the breaching of the planetary boundaries for many, many decades. And across the UK, research shows, but I think you'll all know from lived and learned experience, that the poorest communities, black and brown and global majority communities, will be disproportionately impacted by the compounding risks that we see. But in addition to this, there is a layer where we need to understand that also demographics and communities that have often contributed the least to where we are now are often experiencing it the worst. That is both in the UK and then globally as well. We know that many of our current strategies, which we'll talk a little bit more about shortly, are about inflicting a completely new era of imperialism. A lot of our strategies for net zero and our ways of working through this look at needing to extract minerals and extract labour in ways that will inflict further conflict, trauma, and accelerating crises across the world. And so we know that this is not just a future that we can be like, well, we'll do whatever we want here, and we'll steward the next 400 years of imperialism over the rest of the planet. And so in that space of thinking about both locally, where the poorest people with the lowest carbon footprints, although, by the way, individual carbon footprints, be very careful about that whole world and why that was even brought into our collective rhetoric. But looking at that more globally, we can see that across the rich Western countries, we have stolen futures from many places. We have overconsumed. We have to accept and understand exactly what we're doing, which is embarking very clearly on a new age of imperial power over those with less resource and resources that we have already colonized for many decades.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to understand that the kind of work that we do in these spaces can easily be sort of co-opted or incorporated into wider energy transition strategies that simply are not viable. And for those of you who were here last year, you would have heard something similar from Indy Johar, but we know that if we're looking at the sort of current hegemonic narrative around the energy transition, where we take our economy exactly as it is and we simply unplug it from fossil fuels and then plug it into a lithium battery, this is not actually a feasible theory of transition. We literally do not have the minerals to support our level of energy demand, and we know that demand for sort of rare earth minerals like lithium are likely to sort of swell far beyond any kind of realistic metric. We also know that when we go from our sort of existing economy, like today demand of minerals, up to the demand of minerals that we're predicted to need according to current narratives of energy transition, up 600%. If we look at the actual sort of earth sciences behind this, we start to come across some like little problems, including the fact that there's literally not enough copper in the ground to conduct a transition according to the existing organization of global society and energy consumption. And these are some of the factors that are going to push us towards recreating models of imperialism and extraction that Immy just mentioned. Obviously, we know that these minerals are not extracted without human cost. We know that cobalt comes from incredibly dire conditions, often in Congo. We know that lithium mining and extraction has very significant ecological impacts beyond carbon. And it's outcomes like this which lead to the knowledge that material extraction, regardless of whether that's for carbon or for decarbonized models of energy production, is responsible for 90% of biodiversity loss and also water stress. So we kind of see then that if we open up our understanding of our ecological impact beyond carbon, if we try to go beyond this sort of carbon tunnel vision and think also about the many ways that we impact both planetary boundaries and social outcomes globally, it really is not enough to kind of accept this easy narrative of transition where we are simply changing the power source of the existing economy. We need to actually think far more fundamentally about whole-scale reorganization of our economies, both locally and globally. So the home then and the built environment for us doing our work in the neighborhood really becomes the site through which every single person, no matter their background, no matter their education, can understand some of these often really abstract, intangible risks and problems. And we know that because if we look at the consequences, the lived experience of being in underperforming housing, which again, I don't need to tell you is so prevalent in the UK, you can sort of spin these impacts out into many different conditions, be that air quality, humidity, cold, overheating, transport. People understand these things very instinctively because these are immediate symptoms of everyday life. We can then think about, well, that's not what it's supposed to look like.
We can share the presentation afterwards.
This is a better one.
Yeah.
So we can then think about connected sort of secondary impacts, so how this leads to impacts on productivity, stress, health outcomes, cardiovascular health, transport impacts. These have further knock-on effects, thinking about sort of like tax impacts of different transport approaches, mental health of increased stress, change in mortality, so the fact that if you look at lower income versus higher income areas anywhere in the UK, you can often find life expectancies a decade apart or more. So these are the ways that we can start to have these conversations in our neighborhoods, in our communities, talk about these globalized, often intangible risks in a way that is directly related to their everyday lives and the kind of work we're all interested in the built environment and retrofit. And I think this framing, so this diagram was produced during some of our work with Dark Matter Labs about retrofit. And I think what's really powerful about this is that it doesn't, a lot of the time when we talk about the scale of transition necessary, the immediate response is, well, how are we going to afford that? And what I love about this diagram is that it kind of shows that we're already paying for it.
Yeah.
All of these risks, all of these outcomes come with associated costs that are connected to different public bodies. So it's not a matter of can we pay for it, it's a matter of we are paying for it anyway, so we might as well approach the problem with a level of boldness and ambition that at the moment we're just simply not.
And so as a fairly unlikely character to the retrofit story, which you'll hear about later in the Retrofit Reimagined film, I was captivated by this idea that in the place our communities and people in theory, feel the most amount of agency, not always because they're living in great conditions, but the place that they care the most, the home, the place they live in, the street, is this site of deep imagination and possibility. For me, this became an incredibly important reason as to why we entered into this space of retrofit. And so if we don't, so what happens then, right? We don't have enough minerals, we don't have enough time. We're going to sort of come into a story of recreating a new era of imperialism, and even the good people on the good side of the story are kind of all part of that anyway. So what does that mean? So for us, and you'll be lucky to know there's some what does that mean and what we're doing about it. In fact, that's our entire, what we spend time. So if you're feeling a bit sobered right now, don't worry. Honesty is important. It matters that we know where we are at. But for us, we think about this idea of co-benefits. If we've got all of these challenges and constraints, as Kate Rayworth talks about, those constraints can be the start of where our imagination begins. It means that every act, every material, every home we retrofit, every strategy that we have has to be designed for the maximum amount of co-benefits. If we're in this story of unfurling risks and crises and constant pouring out of feedback loops that are getting us into negative feedback loops and costing us more and creating more injustice, it is also true that as humans we can create systems that encourage those positive feedback loops. So in 3 Degree Neighbourhood, the report, the first half gives you a straightforward kind of look at where we are at, and the second half really starts to look at, well then what would we do about it? We approach it from the scale of the neighbourhood. We look at, in every act, in every home that is retrofitted, in every piece of infrastructure that is built, that in every act we take, how can we maximise the co-benefits to have many benefits across participation, across health, across air quality, across the quality of our housing, across food, and so on and so on. And you know that people in their communities intuitively know this. When you see a broken system in your community, you're like, but if we just did that, then this would happen. And so this is not something that is out of the realms of the places in which we are. In fact, right at the heart of the lived experiences of those challenges, people understand co-benefits most clearly. And so the second half really looks at sort of underpinning are these fundamental transitions. If the transition isn't going to be marginal, it's going to be substantive, it's going to be structural, it's going to mean that we're going to need to rethink how we live, how we eat, how we travel, how we build, our relationship with materials, our relationship with the land. And so in the second half of the report, we really go into a range of looking at these possible futures. We do a lot of work with artists. We look at structurally what would this need to look at like across renewables, across rewilding, across retrofit and the densification of our neighbourhoods through the way we think about resources, the way we think about comfort. I don't have time, obviously, to talk about all of these, but we underpin our work with this kind of, okay, well, what would be the most systemic approach to looking at rewiring these fundamentals? And so this is what our work is really built on. And so for us, retrofit isn't this small thing that happens. I mean, it's quite a big thing, but isn't just this thing that happens to the fabric of the building. It isn't just some solar panels. It isn't just a £10,000 scheme that you've got to rush through as quickly as you can. It isn't just like, sorry, solar panels aren't available for you, so we're going to stick a door on the front. Sorry, those windows that you actually needed we can't do, but the funding says you can have this insulation. We're going to spray it into your house really, really quickly. It isn't these piecemeal approaches. Retrofit for us is this huge site of imagination for societal transition. It allows us to look at the transition around skills. It allows us to look at how our neighbourhoods become commons. It allows us to look at production locally. It allows us to look at materials, our local energy, our streetscape, the wealth and participatory cultures in our neighbourhoods. It means we can look at outside of the home to the street that home is on, the quality of the air, and so on and so on. And so for us, this has been really at the heart of capturing the imagination of this dry and boring and quite dull, like what even is retrofit, and the endless conversation in the built environment about is retrofit the right word, and all those things that I've been in for years. And we just got out onto the street and really understood actually how the home and the street and the neighbourhood is this huge site of imagination for societal transition. As Charlie said, we understood really clearly that that wasn't going to mean that we can just carry on as is. It is going to mean we're going to need some fundamental shifts in our approaches, and the Retrofit Reimagined film later and the panel we're on, we can talk about some of these fundamental shifts. It's not just in plugging from one economy and plugging into another. It is about fundamentally reorganising how we understand retrofit. We did a festival last year and the year before, working with communities and like the unlikely characters all over the country. And, you know, cut a long story short, everybody gets it. You don't need to worry if retrofit's the right language or not. People get it. We've got to think about actually how broadly we can really ignite that imagination that already exists in our communities. And so out of Retrofit Reimagined, we started to really understand. Last year's theme was around land, material and people, and we started to organise around some of what that capacity building looks like in our neighbourhood. We're going to need to speed up a bit.
Yeah, so we understood that, again, as Indy would have almost certainly said last year, we don't have the carbon budget to do retrofit in the way that we're currently doing it. So we really leaned into this problem space of what are the materials that we're going to need to depend on, what are the new supply chains that are going to need to emerge, and how do these show up in neighborhoods and in local production and works. So with material cultures, we this year embarked on this program called Material Matters, where we were trying to bring these skills into the neighborhood and also understand where are the points that make this kind of work so hard to do right now? Where are the barriers in supply chains that stop neighborhoods from engaging with biomaterials, such as clay, timber, straw, soil, and so on? We also looked at how then do you connect, not only how do you democratize these skills and knowledge, but how do you actually introduce these into existing businesses? So at the moment we have this ongoing program called Rebuilders, where we're working with 10 construction SMEs in the West Midlands to identify ways that they can incorporate more biomaterials and generally a more regenerative approach to construction into their organizations, but also understand why these principles are so hard to work according to right now and collectively try and navigate around some of these barriers.
And so often this idea that neighbourhood and community is small. It's where we can sweep up the snow, we can look after each other through mutual aid, but there's no way that we can understand the big complex challenges, the transition to biomaterials, imperialism, minerals, the scale of carbon emissions in our buildings, retrofit. This is fundamentally not true. In a diverse, global majority, working class neighbourhood like Ladywood, you talk about materials and everybody's got a story about what they used to do back home. You talk about carbon emissions and maybe that's not the thing that people are talking about straight away, but they are understanding their home in Bangladesh is underwater, or the impacts of the genocide in Palestine on the climate, or the impacts of Pakistan being half underwater last year. They deeply understand these stories. So what's really important in this is not to see community as a small thing you engage at the end. Our colleague Melissa Mean talks about it being not small or slow, but actually the infrastructure of big, bold, new ideas. So at the heart of our work is this question of what if the climate and ecological transition and deep retrofit of our home streets and neighbourhoods were designed, owned and governed by the people who live there. It can feel like when all we've talked about, God, flipping heck, what are we going to do? But actually there's a lot of liberation and understanding there will not be a marginal transition. We're not going to have a story, we do a few tweaks, we unplug from one place and plug into the other. It is going to be substantive, it is going to be structural and systemic. Luckily, you've got someone amazing talking after us even more practically about some of that. But that isn't going to come without a radical distribution of agency, resources, skills, infrastructures, and a deep ennobling of understanding the power, wisdom, skills, and opportunities that live within our communities. And that's where our work is really situated. I don't have loads of time to talk, so I'm just going to jump onto this one because we're on our last minute. And saying that story of large-scale transition is actually not one that we in Britain don't know. These stories are mired by colonial loot and wealth. But actually, working-class people in Tredegar in South Wales put a penny a week of their salaries together and started to look at what cooperative health could look like. Small groups who were excluded from the education system started to build the groundwork of what would later become our public infrastructure in terms of education. So when we think about things like the NHS and the public libraries and future public goods, they were built by new possibilities emerging in communities demanding and saying, hey, this could be possible. It was 37 years between the formation of the first medical aid society in South Wales, and the formation of the NHS, and a bunch of crises in between. The formation of future public goods and societal transitions are created in our communities. They're created in rooms like this. They're created when communities come together and imagine whole different possibilities, demonstrate and show them in deep detail, and start to build the social conditions, and ultimately are ready for when those crisis points open up windows for us all to step into. We have to take deep responsibility in that. And so for us at CIVIC SQUARE, we're focused on what does that retrofit strategy also sit within. You might know we're working on rebuilding a large site in the heart of our neighbourhood, which is looking at the spaces, the tools, the skills, the resources that communities need, the neighbourhood public square that will help to enable perhaps the GP of the future, the library of the future. It doesn't have to be a big public square like this. It can be a high street, it can be a town hall like this. But the sites that are going to ignite that deep possibility, imagination, and democratise the access for tools and for resources and education to be in the hands of the people. At the heart of our work is really understanding that that means new economic rules. We've done a big piece of work called the Neighbourhood Donut, which really looks at working in how you make donut economics practical in our neighbourhood. And this is situated, again, in really participatory ways of working with our community. And again, breaking news, communities really understand it. They're like, we know the economy isn't working, and we know that we're not meeting the needs of people, and we're damaging the planet. It's not too complicated for us. And so at the heart of our work is really bringing these principles into how we are organising around the possibility in infrastructure, in new rules for the economy. And so our work is sort of split up in these three big demonstrators. So if you came to Birmingham, this is what you'd see us working on. We're building the infrastructure at the heart of our neighbourhood. We've got a compass for new economic possibility at the heart of that. And deeply, we are working in streets in our neighbourhood, looking at what it means for a people-led, socially and climate just retrofit strategy. And next year, we're about to work on an incredible project with Natural Retrofit Hub, with some great funders in 3 places across Bristol, Balsa Heath, and in Birmingham, where we're based, putting this systemic, imaginative story into practice through deep retrofit of our neighbourhoods with Retrofit Balsa Heath and with We Can Make. And so if you're someone who's like, I need a live project to go and plug our company in on, or learn alongside, or bring some resources to, or go and learn with, please do come with us. If on the side you do things like work for NEOM, please don't come to us. It really matters. It really matters that you live what you're talking about. And if you do and you want to divest from that, come talk to us. We can also be therapy. But we've got some really, really great demonstrator projects coming up across the country to build on Retrofit Reimagined. We've got a panel this afternoon and the film, which will give you way more context. And I just want to say that I think when everything can feel really, really dark, one of the principles that we really work on is to not lose our integrity in building these islands of coherence, deep demonstrations of possibility, not just, hey, we couldn't do that, so we just did a bit of this. We just did a bit of this, actually going really deep to the root of democratizing agency, knowledge, skills, ownership, getting to the heart of new economic possibilities. And so what we're trying to do in Birmingham is really create that island of coherence so more of you can point to, but hold on, look at that. They've done that here, they've done that there, and we can work together in that way. And lucky for you, it's not just us. CIVIC SQUARE is one of many organisations like us, unlikely characters into the retrofit space, with deep, deep understanding of their communities, of their neighbourhoods, with imagination and creativity. These are the communities you need to go work with. You need to not persuade them with £10,000 programmes and voucher schemes and come and get involved in our thing. You need to go there and be part of those communities and say, hey, what would the stories that we've told today look like for you in terms of building that demand? Because actually it's already there. People are organising. And so all over the country, there's tons and tons of more people like us. And if you want to hear about a few of the ones that we met when we were in Glasgow last year for Retrofit Reimagined, we'd love to tell you about it as well. So thank you so much. Thanks for being patient with our time as well. And have a great day, everyone.